Hello and welcome to this special episode of Page One, a crossover episode with our podcast Narrative Damage. I'm Marco.
I'm Tarek.
And on Page One we like to speak to writers of all kinds about their writing careers, find out how they got into the industry and try and get as many hints and tips from them as possible. And we've been doing a little short run of episodes to celebrate the launch, I guess, of our new podcast Narrative Damage, which is focused on tabletop role-playing games. And in particular, especially with these interview episodes that we've been doing with people from the tabletop role-playing game world, sort of showing that the creative aspects of writing a book and writing a game, or creating characters for a game, creating worlds for a book, you know, they're all basically the same process that you're going through in many ways. And I feel that, you know, each side can learn from the other's approach in many ways. So we've had a couple of great interviews in the past couple of weeks with Sydney Emmanuel of the Glass Cannon podcast and Dennis Detweiler of Art Dream Publishing, who make Delta Green as well. And we have another brilliant guest this week.
We do indeed. This week we're chatting with the fantastic Mike Mason, who is an award-winning game designer and writer, creative director of the Call of Cthulhu tabletop role-playing game, which is a game kind of Delta Greenish but set historical, investigators looking into the paranormal.
He would probably take Delta Green grew out of Call of Cthulhu, really.
It's imagine Delta Green, you're kind of happy. It's Delta Green light.
No, it's 1920s, normally sort of 1920s or turn of the century. But actually, you can set Call of Cthulhu modern. You can set it way in the past. There's all sorts of variants.
Okay.
It's a horror game. It's generally the concept is take a bunch of ordinary people, so not your typical role-playing game heroes on a mission. It's more like, you know, teachers or librarians or something, explorers, and put them into a scenario where eventually, you know, something spooky is going on, and often eventually they will encounter Lovecraftian beings and often meet their end, whether that is through insanity or through death or both.
Yes, the going insane part is very well done. You know, you'll lose your sanity as events happen, and it makes it harder and harder to succeed. And it's a very good spin on, rather than just a pure health bar. It's a nice kind of twist on it. I think it's good.
Exactly, and Mike is, as you say, the creative director for Chaosium. Chaosium celebrating their 50th anniversary this year, in fact. And Call of Cthulhu is a massive game. It's you know, I would say it and Delta Green are tied for me as my favourite role-playing games, because of that sort of investigative element to the stories that you can tell, and because of the horror side that you can do. So you can play a Call of Cthulhu game. It can be serious, it can be scary, or it can be more pulpy and more fun. You know, you could almost put a sort of Indiana Jones spin on it, and there is a pulp Cthulhu set of rules that lets you do that sort of stuff. So there's a whole variety, and Mike is a really fun and interesting interviewee. Nice. He has also very kindly given us 2 Call of Cthulhu starter sets to give away as prizes. And if you want to find out how to win those, you'll have to stay on till the end of the episode, and I'll explain more. And we will also tell you about our first actual play, because Narrative Damage is also going to be authors playing role-playing games, different types of role-playing games, Call of Cthulhu, Dungeons & Dragons, Alien, The One Ring, all sorts of different types of role-playing games that we'll be playing with some of your favourite authors at the table to tell stories together, because that's sort of concept behind it. And we'll tell you all about the first one of those at the end of this podcast. So please stay tuned after Mike's interview. But for now,
on with the podcast.
So when we have you know, authors or screenwriters and stuff on the podcast, my opening question is always, did you always want to be a writer? I know you have written fiction as well yourself, but I just wondered, did you always enjoy storytelling, as a sort of wider format, I guess.
Yeah. No, absolutely. No, I mean, I never thought about working in the games industry.
Yeah, sure.
I always thought that if I did anything I really want to do, it'd be as a writer.
Mm-hmm.
And mainly, a writer of horror stories. That's why when I was a kid, that was kind of like, my dream role would be to write, science fiction horror stories, to be honest. Even when I started gaming, role playing games as a hobby and board games, it never occurred to me that it would be anything more than a hobby, even though I was writing my own kind of adventures and scenarios to play with friends. It never occurred to me that would be something that was a real job, because all that kind of stuff, as far as I was concerned at that age, happened in America.
Yeah.
And I didn't live in America. So therefore, how on earth would I ever get a job doing that? So I didn't even think about it.
I mean, I was going to ask about when you were first starting out, when you were first started playing games. We're saying just before we started to record, Mark was recently kind of got me into this area of role-playing games, playing around the table with people. But what was the first game that you started playing with when you were younger? What sort of stuff was it that hooked you into the
Well, I mean, the earliest stuff would have been your standard kind of family board games, Monopoly, or Monotony as I call it now. Cluedo, all those kind of family games, chess and drafts. It wasn't until about 1979, I was invited to a friend's birthday, and didn't really realize until I got there, because I didn't understand, that we were there to play a game, which was fine, but it was actually Dungeons and Dragons. I didn't know that then. All I saw was these kind of cardboard dungeon tiles and miniatures of skeletons and wizards and soldiers and fighters and that kind of thing, and where I kind of had a bit of paper with some numbers on it. I knew nothing, and it was like, roll this, being told to roll d20s and dice, and you're gonna hit the skeleton. Oh, you hit the skeleton. Oh, you destroyed it. Way! And it was kind of jumping feet first and just go with it. And but I had an awesome time. It was really fun. Even though we were just fighting goblins and skeletons in some dungeon without any real story, it was really engaging. It was very exciting, and the miniatures looked awesome even back then, and I was thoroughly engaged. And I just kind of came away thinking that was brilliant. It was like the best game I've ever played.
Yeah,
I want more, kind of thing. And that was kind of my first experience. And it just so happened that around about the same time, just after, my history teacher at school, he'd already introduced the kind of concept of historical gaming, as in war games, as in here's all the Greek ships come in and we're going to fight this little battle to kind of get us excited about ancient history. He started a games club at school, and as part of that, it was really a role-playing games club, because he was clearly getting into it as well, playing Dungeons and Dragons. So it just a whole bunch of us kind of discovering it together, almost with a bit of help from the teacher, and we're all kind of hooked straight away.
And so, I mean, from those early beginnings, how did you then eventually, what path took you to, first of all, running your own games, writing your own scenarios, to eventually actually becoming, making money out of money out of this?
Yeah. I mean, as I say, I had no expectation of ever doing that. So it was very much my hobby, like for the majority of people in this kind of field. Like everyone else, I started running pre-published stuff, and that was great. And but it's very very quickly you start kind of playing around with the idea of designing your own dungeons, and having these dragons living next to the goblins for no good reason, but it's makes no sense, but it's all good game. And kind of doing all that for many years, really. And I kind of, around about 1983, 3, 4, I kind of discovered the game that was really, the game I liked the most, which was Call of Cthulhu, which was a horror mystery game. And that was really my kind of, that was definitely my kind of bread and butter. I really loved that kind of stuff. And I had not found that kind of genre in any of the games I played before. So it was kind of new to me. And I kind of naturally, because it's very much about telling a horror story at the end of the day. And I was really into, I'd been reading horror fiction and short stories for years as growing up. It seemed very natural to start designing my own mysteries to run. And so I did that for many, many years. But they were just things I would run for friends. And then I started to go to kind of games conventions in the UK. I found pretty quickly that, people that ran games were in demand, and you could often either get in for free if you were running games or that kind of thing. So it seemed like an easy win, or I can go to a convention for free if I run a game. Yeah. So I just started to kind of bring my own kind of written stuff to run, and that kind of fairly rapidly expanded because you would meet other games masters and runners and other running the same, running Call of Cthulhu games, and so you kind of like naturally kind of got together and have a beer during the convention and chat about things, and soon I kind of built a kind of a loose kind of club of people that ran and wrote games for Call of Cthulhu in the UK, and we kind of called ourselves the Cult of Keepers, and we would just basically rock up to some of the larger kind of shows in the UK and occasionally one or two in Europe. And we'd go, anywhere from 4 to 10 of us, and we'd run a load of games. And sometimes that would kind of be loosely formatted around a kind of a tournament kind of idea, or just running games. And we kind of built up a bit of a reputation for running, good games, and people would kind of seek us out. But it was all very much still very much an amateur hobby kind of thing. We just enjoyed doing it. But it was around that time as well that I then decided to put out a fanzine. There had been previously fanzines, for role playing and particularly for horror games like Call of Cthulhu. But at that precise time, there was nothing. Whatever had been now has stopped, and so there really wasn't anything happening in the kind of fan publishing side. And I guess part of my old kind of like thinking of quite enjoy writing, quite enjoy putting things together, kind of came to the fore. So I put out a fanzine called The Whisperer, and it was pretty much solely kind of focused on kind of Call of Cthulhu gaming, and it would and I had a lot of people interested in kind of sending me material. So the idea originally was, I would write most of it, put it out, and see if people wanted it. And pretty quickly that turned into me editing and not writing hardly anything in it, because I had so much material coming in from other people who just wanted to share their stuff. And so I very quickly kind of just took on the role of kind of editor and publisher for that. And it's in doing that, and because it was I was putting out material for Call of Cthulhu, I thought it was only kind of polite to let the publisher of Call of Cthulhu know about it and just check that they were okay and I wasn't going to get into trouble. So I contacted Chaosium near San Francisco at the time, and kind of established a relationship with them. It was all mutually wonderful, and they were very happy and very supportive. And so I did that for about 5 years, putting out one issue a year, because I had a full-time job and there hadn't been much time to do it. So but in doing that, I kind of established a relationship with the publisher, and kind of, I guess, kind of established my credentials to some degree. Yeah. And so occasionally thereafter they would say, hey, we need an English person to edit some text about England in the 1920s. Can we send it over for you to look at? So I would do little odds and bits and pieces for them, just kind of fact checking, or making sure that the American writer understood that in England in 1923 there were handguns, but we didn't all walk around with them in the middle of London. All those kind of little quirks and things. So, and that then led at some point one of the writers slash GMs in the Cult of Keepers was a friend of mine called Paul Fricker, and we'd talked for a long time about the state of the game that is Call of Cthulhu, and decided it was a bit out of date, and that the rule book was hard to navigate. It wasn't very user friendly, particularly to new people. And it just seemed that all the players were just getting older like us, and not many younger players were coming in thinking, let's we do something, or somebody does something. We're going to be the last people that play this game because nobody else. So we kind of cooked up a harebrained scheme to kind of offer to write a new edition of the game, which we kind of, thought we could do, but we hadn't really, we didn't really think Chaosium would accept that. I should take a side step at the moment to kind of give you some wider context, because this is all fan-based stuff. Mm-hmm. In my day-to-day life, I've been working in not in the games industry, but at one point, a few years before where I've got to in the story, I was looking for a new job. I was very, very bored in the job I was doing. And I was looking through the newspapers, and there was a job at Games Workshop in Nottingham. And back in the day, I'd played Warhammer First Edition and Second Edition and a bit of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, but I'd kind of drifted away out of that and really just focused on things like Call of Cthulhu and Pendragon and whatnot. But I thought it was a job for an events manager, which is actually what I was doing a lot of the time in my normal jobs, non-gaming. So I thought, what the hell? I'll just apply, and without any thought that I would get it. And of course, I got the job. So I moved to Nottingham and worked for Games Workshop for some years in their kind of sales area in terms of community building and events and marketing and that kind of stuff. But there's quite a lot of flow within Games Workshop. People move around a bit, and so I had the opportunity to another job came up, basically to manage and look after their role-playing game division. Right. So I thought, well, I do role-playing games. I understand that. I think I can do that. So I applied and I got that job. So I was working then properly in the games industry, as in I was writing, designing, editing, and getting Games Workshop inspired role-playing games and board games out. So that to translate what that means, board games like working on the new edition of Talisman and expansions for that board game, working on Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay Second Edition, but most importantly was co-writing and getting Dark Heresy, which was the brand new Warhammer 40,000 role-playing game. So that was really what I was brought in to kind of, let's get that finished and done. Mm-hmm. So I had a sort of a mad 6 months of getting that out in the publishable state. So that was kind of going on in the background as I was talking to Chaosium about, hey, I've got this other project that I want to do as a freelancer outside of my day job. But again, I'd built up credentials with Chaosium in terms of being somebody I guess, knew and trusted a little bit. That I understood the game, I understood the intellectual property around the game, what's what. So I kind of had that kind of credential, and then I guess to kind of seal the deal, I had the credential of actually already working in the games industry, already writing a major role-play publication, and that combined with myself and Paul going on saying, hey, here's our idea, would you like us to kind of give it a go? We thought they would go away and kind of go, yeah, well, we'll have a think about it, we'll get back to you. And of course what they did is just turn around, yes, please go and do it. So, okay. So but as I say, it was a freelance kind of gig with no real agreement on timescale or money and no contract. It was one of those kind of like, well, if it happens, it happens kind of deal. So we then spent 4 years in our own time, basically between myself and Paul, basically developing and writing what would become now Call of Cthulhu 7th edition. Play testing and all that kind of stuff. And then delivered the manuscript, our first draft anyway, to Chaosium at the end of 4 years, not even knowing then whether they'd want it or actually take it or even pay us, and then that started the kind of the whole track down the road with them doing a wider playtest. Well, in fact, we doing a wider playtest on behalf of Chaosium and getting lots more feedback, and then doing a new draft of the rules and all that kind of thing. And then Chaosium decided to kickstart the new game, and that kickstarted successfully. And so that kind of meant that Chaosium had a bit of money to play with. And at that point, they turned around to me and said, "Hey, what we need is somebody to now make it happen in-house." So they kind of turned around and said, "Well, what do you want to do it?" Because again, I'd had the credentials of already working in-house in a games publisher. So I guess they kind of thought that I might know what I was doing. And again, it just happened in the real world. My job at Games Workshop had ceased. Games Workshop had decided to kind of retract and only focus on their core games, which were Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay and 40k, and all the other stuff, which would be my stuff, as in role-playing games and board games, would be licensed out. So Games Workshop weren't interested in doing them in-house anymore. So basically, my job became redundant. I was, snapping around for something else to do. When Chaosium turned around and said, "We'd like to offer you a full-time job." So, okay. So, yes, I'll take that, please, because I need a job. So, and then I came on board to kind of see that through. And some 12 years later, I'm still here doing the same thing. So, actually, it works okay somewhere.
I wanted to ask, I mean, that whole kind of journey, I'm kind of conscious a lot of the listeners to this show are probably people who listen to more or authors who write book novels and screenplays and stuff. And I kind of wanted to ask you about your writing. When you were talking there about having written various campaigns or second editions, etc., of various games that were out there, and I wondered what. And you're someone who has written your own prose fiction. You've written books, and I wondered what do you see as when you say you're writing a campaign? How does that compare to writing a book? What does that mean when you say you're writing something for
it's a great question. I mean, it's you, and you don't discover this until you do it. If when you start, because we are very used because we read a lot of fiction. When we learn to read, we carry on. Most people anyway. You automatically kind of build up an idea of how not how to write well, but at least how to write. I'm kind of copying all the things I've ever written. So, I know roughly, that how to write a story at least. When you come to a role-playing game, you realize it's a very, very different proposition because you're not writing a story anymore. You're writing a set of tools for other people to tell a story. Mm-hmm. Okay. And you can't, you can try and dictate the middle and end of the story, but that's unlikely to work, particularly nowadays, where in the very early days of role-playing, it was a little bit more formulaic and people kind of followed this kind of linear path almost to get to the end. But that doesn't really cut it anymore. People are far more used to kind of much more kind of free form and games where players have a lot more agency. So what you kind of come to realize with writing for certainly tabletop role-playing games is that you are writing this strange hybrid of creative fiction and technical writing. Yeah, because you're fusing together these technical rules that are cast iron in terms of that's a rule. There's no way around it. It's black and white in that sense. Yeah. But you're dressing it around this this fiction. This whether the fiction is a fantasy world and setting or the fiction of a plot. And what you effectively are doing is dissecting a plot into its component parts and kind of presenting that and saying, here's a series of locations, encounters, characters, clues, events and antagonists that you can basically shape around a loose story. That I will give you the starting point. No, here's a fixed starting point, more or less, where your players can start, but thereafter they could go in any direction. So what you're trying to do is help the person running that game to navigate that by saying, here are the 5 most common things that most players are going to do, and this is the order they're likely to do them in. And so you can do that, and you can map out a kind of a logical progression, while on the sides of all of that, you're throwing in, well, but if they don't do that, they might do this instead, which means this, this, and this. So you're kind of throwing ifs and buts, but trying to kind of keep it within a nutshell. Otherwise, you just keep writing forever and never finish it, because anything is possible. But you've got to kind of, train it into what is likely or what is most likely, and provide enough kind of flexibility in the text, in the actual product, that whoever is actually running it in the end feels confident that they can run it as written, but equally they can, as needed, run it on the fly as well, if they need to suddenly kind of be a little bit creative and improvise a new character or a scene that we hadn't anticipated for most groups to take on. But you're looking to, as I kind of call it, you're providing the game runner with enough ammunition to keep firing excitement at the players, to keep them involved and keep them going, basically. And it's it's certainly a definite kind of skill we have, you learn as a game writer, because you have to unlearn the fiction bit, because fiction, you want to tell your story, and you have an ending, or you'll get to an ending in your story that is set. There's only one possible ending in fiction, and that's the one the writer chose. Whereas in a role-playing game, that won't necessarily ever be the ending that's achieved.
Yeah, although there are, I'm thinking of something like Masks of Nyarlathotep, which is like the massive Call of Cthulhu campaign, currently running it now. But it's got it's a globe spanning adventure, and the players can choose to go from one city to another, and you don't know, if you're running the game, which city they're going to go to. But as you say, there's lots of information and stuff that can help, no matter what stage they get to that particular city or whatever. You can run the game. But there is still an overall story. There's a very coherent, I think, overall story there that somehow still works, despite it being all these different moving pieces. And that is something, again, going back to fiction writing, if you're in fiction, you get planners and pantsers, they say. So if you were a planner type person, it's the sort of thing that would be an absolute nightmare to you, I think. but there is still a way, I think, to tell a story with these things, even giving the freedom over to the players. And I just wondered how do you sort of have sort of certain tent poles or something that you're sort of pointing them at and let them get there themselves? Is that
I mean, there's obviously various styles of gaming within the broad spectrum of tabletop role-playing games. There's different kind of styles or genres of role-playing game within the broad umbrella of that kind of type of gaming. And some are very, very player-focused, where there really isn't a plot, and the players collectively design the plot as they go. And there isn't a scenario or linear thing. It's literally made up on the fly. You are literally making it up as you go along. Whereas the game that I kind of look after, Call of Cthulhu, is you can run it like that, but in the main, because with a mystery game, you've got this choice. You can, as a player, you can engage with the mystery. Therefore, you don't know what it is. and therefore they're part of the appeal for a game like Call of Cthulhu is to actually engage with the mystery and actually, be Sherlock Holmes and try and fathom it out and realize what's going on. And there's a kind of a sense of reward and enjoyment in doing that. Obviously, which you don't get in a game where you are making the mystery up as you go along, because there isn't actually no mystery. It's like, you're just making it up, which is fine. But so for Call of Cthulhu, you need to have almost to begin with, before you need to kind of, I guess, start without thinking about the players and think, well, if the players weren't there and you've just got a villain or a monster of some kind, what's going on? What are they about? So and in the example that you gave of Mask of Nyarlathotep, without keeping away from any big spoilers, but ultimately you have a cult, a bunch of humans who are kind of worshipping these alien gods, and what they want to do is open a big doorway and let the gods come into the earth, and they will be heralded as heroes of the and the gods will elevate them and all that kind of thing. Whether that's how misguided that may be is another question. However, in their heads, they're all, we're going to be bestowed great gifts and power, and we're going to be the rulers of the new earth, and if we get all this to happen. So you think about, like, so who is the villains? What do they want to achieve, and how are they achieving it? And so you kind of map that out, and that's kind of almost set in stone, because that's nothing to do with the players of the game. That's literally, this is what's going to happen if the players don't exist. So the cultists are going to do X, Y, and Z, and if they do it correctly, they will open the portal, and it will be the end of the world. That's the plot. And obviously within that there's various details of what cult A is doing in England as cult B is doing in America, and how are they working together, and that's kind of another layer of detail, and you can just layer as much as you think you're going to need into that kind of plot. And then so now you understand what your story is. The next step is to kind of like put all that aside and go, okay, we've got a bunch of players, investigators. What are they going to do? And that's where you kind of turn it on its head. So you've got this kind of like foundation, and then you bring, so how do the players become aware of this grand plot? What's the instigating event? And then where do they go from there? And then you start to map it, kind of taking the player's view. So we start here. What do we learn here that takes us to here, and then takes us to there and there and there? And you kind of map out the player's journey almost, or their options, to get them to somewhere where either they can witness the end of the world or stop it. And within that, you are looking to then obviously look at how you map your foundation story to the players, while ensuring the players have hopefully some sense of freedom to feel that they are in control of their character. Now, obviously, this is a massive illusion, and other game designers will tell you the opposite to what I'm about to tell you. They will tell you that linear adventures are terrible, and you need to give players a choice and all that kind of thing. And you can do that if you create a game like I started by saying, where there is no plot and the players make it up. That is not a linear game. The players are making it up, and you can go and find those. However, for any traditional mystery role-playing game, it is a railroad, and it is linear, even though it doesn't seem to be. Even in Masks, where the players have a choice of where they literally, what countries they visit, they will always pick the countries we've chosen, because the plot is those.
The clues are leading them there.
Lead you there. So even though you may take a different route through the campaign, you will still take the same route in a sense. And so it's an illusion of choice. And there are players can have real choices within that. However, the overarching big choice is, at the end of the day, the world's going to end unless the players stop it. So you're going to get there either way. And so it is a kind of a semi-illusion of choice. But it really is that kind of you see it very simply done in the kind of choose your own adventure
That's what I was thinking
books
of.
that I grew up with as a kid. Why Warlock of Firetop Mountain and all of those kind of genre of games. Which are clearly, you can learn two things from those books. You can learn how the basic threads of a role-playing game at the tabletop work. They also give you the basic threads of how a computer game will work, because obviously they're far more fixed, like a choose your own adventure. The difference with the role-playing game is you've got that kind of underlying structure, but then you've got the ability to freeform over and above that as well. So
yeah, it's funny. It makes me think of the old kind of Telltale games, like the Walking Dead games, where you had this kind of A to B story, but it still you had that feeling of, I am impacting the story, I'm making choices, even though when you pull back and look at it, you've actually got quite limited. It's all very binary A/B options that always lead you back to the same point, but it feels like you've kind of mapped your own route there, which is quite. It's quite, quite a skill, I think.
Yeah, absolutely correct. Yeah, the thing is with kind of style of games I'm talking about is players will do the unexpected. They will do things that kind of not break the adventure, but cause the person running it, the games master, the keeper, to kind of have to kind of give me 5 minutes to think about this, or we'll break here and we'll come back next session next week. And I'll have had time to kind of work out what I'm going to do to kind of mitigate what you've just done. For instance, when I was younger and I played this campaign we've been talking about, Masks of Nyarlathotep, as a player, one of my friends who was also a player, one of the things you do during Call of Cthulhu is you amass information. You amass what we kind of call arcane lore and all this kind of secret information about the realities of the universe. And normally through collecting these old and ancient kind of tomes of dread and magic and things in the game. And you gather all these, and in the game your characters are reading them, and they're acquiring this forbidden knowledge and maybe spells they can use in the game. And so we'd acquired all this massive kind of library of really cool stuff, but we hadn't yet really started to read it because we'd just been running around being chased by these cultists who are trying to kill us. And we keep running, and at some point we'll get to read all this really useful stuff and find out why we're being chased and shot at. And of course, my friend's character decided that the best thing to do would be to run off with all the books, which isn't planned for in the campaign. Literally, my character's leaving the campaign, unbeknown to any of the other characters, in the middle of the night, taking all of our treasures with him, and leaving us completely in the lurch. And that's exactly what he did. And the player just turned up with basically a new character who knew nothing about what was going on, and said, "Well, that my old character is my new character." Like, this is fine. And so we were kind of going, okay, but the story in the book doesn't allow for that. It doesn't anticipate that someone's going to run off with all the useful information, all the clues. But the nature of a role-playing game is that the person who was running the game kind of made just said, okay, well you know what you know. What do you want to do next? And we we kind of built it around a bit, and we kind of managed to kind of find our feet and head off. But there's the trick is kind of providing the person enough kind of cushion force to kind of be able to deal with that without knowing what they're going to have to deal with. Yeah, if you know what I mean. Yeah. That's part of the trick, I guess.
And also the other thing is with these games, just like in that scenario, there is a collaborative process as well. Obviously, you've got your games master or keeper or whatever, depending on the system, who's all over the detail of it. But it's a story you're all telling around the table. So if someone chooses to do that, then you can sort of try and work out what to do next together.
Yeah, you can't collaboratively kind of do, and that's what we kind of did. We collaborated as players. So, okay, well, we had the choice: do we go and try and find this other character and deal some retribution on him, or do we just accept that he's gone? In the end, we decided to accept that he'd gone because we weren't going to achieve what we needed to do by running after him. But as you say, you collaboratively kind of, and that's the beauty of role playing games is they are a series of challenges or problems to overcome as a bunch of players, and that is part of the fun. Whether they're problems that were written into the book or problems that you create yourselves through the game, it becomes a very engaging kind of experience, and that's why it's why people like them. It's a very social experience, and it's one where you work together to overcome a challenge in some way, and that often can be fun.
I mean, when you look at the books that are written for these games, they're oftentimes hefty tomes. They're really detailed. There's loads of like world building, loads of history, loads of character background, loads of possible, as you say, like all the kind of stuff you could do, all the options that are available. And I wonder, they always make me think of something like a Bible for a TV show or something, where it's like, here's the entire world that you're playing with. If you could write an episode, here's what you have to play with, and it's how much time and research goes into making this and this book, and how important is it that it's consistent with what's with previous books and the previous editions, etc.
Sure, it really varies depending on the IP and the game you're working on. There are some that are very much more strict. There's a definite kind of backstory that can't be diverted from, and there may even be a story going on. So if you're dealing with licensed IPs, for instance, as an example, Babylon 5. I'll pull out some ancient science fiction TV show that nobody will remember. Babylon 5. There's a definite, true story from start to end that you see in the TV series. So if you're designing a role-playing game, you've got where are we on the timeline? Are we at episode 1, season 1, or are we post-show or pre-show? Which will obviously give you an indication. And obviously, wherever you pick that, there's things you can't deviate from, and the same goes for some Warhammer settings and things like that. The settings in 40k are well defined within the existing law of Games Workshop material, whether that's their war games or their fiction line or even cartoons or whatever else they're doing these days. So you can't, and you can try and divert off it, but if it's a licensed thing, you're going to have to show it to your licensor, and they're going to go yes or no. And if you've gone off the reservation, they're going to go no and shift you back into kind of their IP. Whereas what I do for Call of Cthulhu, because there is no canon. So Lovecraft, who originally kind of created the Cthulhu mythos, to give it a name, created, the stories do not combine into a cohesive canon. He just wrote stories to sell them to Weird Tales or wherever, and each one stands on its own merit. But he would reuse the ideas. So he'd reuse the names of these alien monsters or these gods, and they were just names. He'd just throw a bunch of names in here and a bunch of names there. So it felt like the stories were connected. It felt like they were part of a shared universe, even though really then they weren't in terms of intent and design. They were just stories. So in terms of the books that Chaosium does for Call of Cthulhu, I kind of continue that view, because obviously it makes my life easier, because every book or every adventure can exist in its own universe. So or they can all exist in the same universe, but that's your choice as a bunch of players where you want to mix and match them. So for instance, as I say, there's no big secret. At the end of Masks of Nyarlathotep, the world either ends or it doesn't. So if you play through Masks of Nyarlathotep and your world ends, well, clearly the next time you play Call of Cthulhu, you're in a different dimension, because the world ended in that one. You know what I mean? So I try and treat it very much like that. So, and also that gives the players a lot of flexibility, and the kind of the homebrew adventure designers a lot of freedom, because they're not feeling tied that they've got they've got to follow the strictures that we've laid down, and because often people do feel like that. They'll I wanted to feel part of the Star Wars universe, therefore I'm not going to have Darth Vader wearing his pink cyber suit today. I want it to feel like part of the films, and I want the players to feel like. So I'm going to keep really close to the standard IP, because you don't have to, but people want to do that, don't they? So with Call of Cthulhu, it's very much saying, we encourage, we put out a big book of monsters, which are kind of based on the fiction and things that we've created over the years, and have got their own kind of sense of history with them. But equally, within that big monster book, the whole chapter on, hey, forget all of these monsters in the book, design your own. Here's some ideas of how you might go about designing a monster in Call of Cthulhu. And so it's one of the things about role-playing games is that it is a very kind of creative outlet for people. And so, just as I kind of explained earlier on, when I started role-playing, there was an inherent kind of like, oh, I could write my own stuff and I could have fun doing that. And that's never changed. People come to role-playing games, they not all of them, but a lot of them feel, actually, I want to write my own stuff. I want to kind of do stuff. And so we really encourage that, because obviously I'm in my role looking for the writers of tomorrow to say, hey, do you want to do some freelance work and keep the ideas fresh? And so it's not just the same handful of people writing everything. We want to keep going and bring new ideas in and more diverse ideas. So we have a kind of an online kind of storefront that's called the Miskatonic Repository, which is housed at a place called Drive-Thru RPG, where an independent player who goes away and designs their own scenario and adventure or whatever can basically upload it to this marketplace. They set their own price. They retain copyright on it. It's their material. But we grant them a kind of a license to basically use our stuff if they're putting it on here. And we Drive-Thru, who host it, take a little cut. We take a little cut as the kind of the vendor, but the writer takes the lion's share. And so that's grown over the last few years to be a really significant thing. We've got lots of people writing stuff, and obviously there's a natural kind of economy there where the good stuff rises up and people want more of that, and so those writers get more recognition, and you get the subsidiary benefits of, like, you have these kind of writers communities popping up on Facebook or wherever, where they're mutually supporting each other, and that's rolling out into other creators like artists and layout and proofing. And so this whole kind of hive of content creator is kind of growing on the side as in parallel to what we're doing in terms of the mainstream kind of publications. We've got all this extra stuff, and so I'm trying to tie this all back to the original question. So that means that all the IP that these guys are creating and they're owning is all their stuff, that if they choose then to write more, they're betting on that. And indeed, so we've got some people who then go and write fiction and maybe incorporate the kind of creations they've done in game in their fiction, and vice versa. We've got fiction writers who go, hey, I'm a gamer too. I want to kind of incorporate some of my ideas I've done in fiction into the games, and they have full freedom to do so, because we're not claiming that we own all of everything in the world. That's what that's their thing.
Cool.
So it's, as I say, it's very much a ever creating encouragement about creating things, because that's part and parcel of being a role player. Is that that kind of, whether your outlet is painting miniatures, writing stuff, or designing. I mean, that's the thing about Call of Cthulhu that people really love, is that it's a game that's very handout heavy. So because it's all about finding ancient books and family trees and bits of diaries, and that all give clues in the game, a lot of people like to kind of create those as physical props and make them age them with some old tea and all that kind of stuff. And so that's a whole kind of side of creativity that people who really enjoy kind of creating all those kind of prop things as well. So it kind of brings all these different sort of styles of creativity together that go, beyond the writing, in that sense, which is great to see, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to ask, obviously, Call of Cthulhu is a horror, investigative mystery horror game. And horror, when you write it on the page, there are techniques that writers will use to elicit that horror, to get that feeling as you're reading it and stuff like that. When you're writing a scenario, well, actually, both from the perspective of writing, perhaps, and also running a game, how do you bring that horror element through? Because it's not quite the same as just writing a horror story.
Yeah, I mean, that's the $1 million question, I guess. A fair bit, as you can imagine. It's and there's no easy answer, because as you say, there are techniques in fiction writing where you can get hopefully some sort of desired outcome in terms of helping the reader to feel a bit unnerved or freaked out or whatever it may be, or just grossed out if it's school or whatever. But in a role-playing game, it's slightly different, because starting point would be, I don't know who's going to play it, and I don't know how old they are or what their level of tolerance for horror is. So, and because horror is a very broad church, as you can imagine, you go from like a fairy tale like Hansel and Gretel, which ultimately is a little bit of a horror story about some witch in the woods eating children, through to, name whatever banned horror film you want to on the scale, so, and all points in between. So a game that kind of professes itself to be a horror game, we need to be certainly aware that horror doesn't mean everything to the same people. It means many different things. So we have to acknowledge that and kind of scale the horror in a certain way, or say that, there's this particular adventure deals with this subject matter, make sure your players are comfortable with that subject matter, because they may not be. And if so, play something else or change these things to, mitigate that kind of, if they've got an issue. That's where we start from. But once you decide, we're going to play it for horror, as it were, there's no real secret to it. There's no surefire way, because it's literally, this is when magic happens that you can't preordain. All you can do is set the parameters and set the atmosphere and try and create the right environment for it to happen. And often, I go to a lot of game shows and a lot of conventions where I get asked to run a game of Call of Cthulhu, and sometimes I get like 9:30 on Sunday morning. It's the slot I'm going to run a game of Call of Cthulhu. Now, I can try my hardest, but quite frankly, no one is going to be that horrified at 9:30 on a Sunday morning. Most people are going to be either hungover or just still asleep or whatever it is. It's just not a good time to play that kind of game. Whereas, somewhere around 11 o'clock on a Saturday night, heading into midnight, is probably a really good time to play a horror game, because, so there's things like that. There's timing that makes a difference. There's the ambience when whether you're playing in a massive warehouse where there's 1,000 people playing games around you, and all the chatter is not going to be very atmospheric, and the ability to kind of make people feel horrified is virtually zero. So creating a space, an enclosed space, if you can get a little room, or if you're playing around the house, you're not in the same room that your partner is watching TV in, or whatever it may be. You're in the kitchen or whatever, and you can dim the lights a bit. You've got some LED candles or real candles or whatever it is you want to do to sort of create a bit of atmosphere. Some people use a bit of background music, or kind of soundscapes to kind of help set a bit of ambience. So you can do those kind of things, and that might help. It might not. I don't know. It depends on you and your group on that time of day. Because then you bring in the human factor to it. You as the person running the game might be all set up. All right, I've got a really creepy setup tonight. They're going to be going into this house. It's really creepy. I've got all these things I can do to freak them out and get the players really scared and all that kind of thing. And they're going to love it, And then all the players rock up and they've all had the worst day of their life at work and they're really tired. And they don't really want to think tonight. They just want to roll some dice and hit things. And what they won't really get the most out of is your creepy house. So that's also a factor. But as I say, if you get all the components right and the players turn up and they're up for it and they're ready and they're engaged tonight and the plot's, pretty engaging and you're doing your best to kind of create the right atmosphere and you're describing, the sound of the breeze through the willows as they enter the house and all that kind of good stuff. Then as the game progresses and the players are contributing to it too, and they're getting each other sort of tense on it and all that kind of thing, and the rules are helping because the rules are designed to kind of help to build tension, and then that's when the magic happens. So I can't explain, I can't tell you how to do it other than do all these other things. It might happen, and occasionally, the magic will happen, and everyone will go whoa, or whatever, or they'll finish the game and they won't want to leave the table because they're talking about it, and it has an effect, and that's that's wonderful. But it's like, as I say, in any horror film, it's not horrifying for every second of the film. And that's the same with a role-playing game. You build to it, you have a set piece or a thing that kicks off, and then you down again. And it's, and it could be comedy in between. It could be like The Evil Dead, and it's comedy and a bit of horror, then more comedy. Or it could be, slow burn and a bit of horror and slow burn. You can't have existential dread for every second of a role-playing game. It doesn't work. And so you have to kind of be kind to yourselves and realize, you won't have this horror magic every session, and not all the time. It will come as and when it's ready to come, but just enjoy it when it happens.
That's quite. Why is it that? I mean, and I know there are a vast variety of different role playing games out there, but to me, as someone who doesn't play a lot, it seems to me like there's a real leaning towards horror in these games. Like there's D&D, Cthulhu, the Alien RPG, etc. What is it about horror setting or storytelling that seems to work so well for this type of game? Or am I wrong, and is it actually more of an even keel across other genres?
Well, I mean, I would say the biggest genre is fantasy roleplay, which isn't technically horror, but within that there is horror as well. But in if you literally on numbers, in terms of across the world, the majority of people are donning armor and getting a magical sword and hitting goblins and stealing their treasure.
Okay.
That's the largest market. However, one step down from that, you will find it is their kind of more plot story-based games that are following up, and Call of Cthulhu certainly is one of those. I think, for me, I just equate it to fiction. So the largest kind of genre in fiction in terms of sales is mystery detective fiction, crime fiction, however you want to term it. And I just I kind of just make a massive assumption here that people like engaging into a mystery and trying to either just enjoy the mystery or try and work it out as they go and try get there before the author does almost. And I think there's, and that's replicated on TV. What tend to be the most popular TV programs, crime programs, following the detective around or whatever it is. Clearly, there's a human desire that enjoys mystery in its broadest sense, storytelling. We want to figure out what's going on. We don't necessarily want all the answers day one. We want to figure it out as well and be presented. And so, a game like Call of Cthulhu is exactly that. It is, you're presented with a kind of a locked room mystery or whatever it may be, and you've got no clue why it's happening, but by the acquisition of clues and information and you build up a picture and you're trying to solve this thing, and ultimately you're gonna, the good thing with a game is that you are the detective. You get to direct the play, and you get to ask the questions, and you get to kind of rough up the barman in the speakeasy if it's 1920s or whatever it is, or hack a computer for some modern day game or whatever it is. You live out all these kind of filmic fantasies, and your characters are the start of the story. So I think that plays a large part in it. I think people like to engage in that, and as I say, it's a very social pastime. I mean, you can. There's plenty of solo and journaling style kind of games within the role play sphere, even though they're technically not really role playing. You can do solo, but the majority of people want to play with friends or acquaintances or people they've never met before, and because it's good fun, because two heads are better than one in terms of when it's a mystery. You're coming at things at your angle, so it really kind of fits to that kind of that kind of style of media, I guess.
And in the same way that when you're watching a TV show or something and you suddenly think, oh wait, that's what happened, that he did it or whatever, it's even more like you get that feeling of satisfaction more because you are part of the story.
Connecting the dots, and you see it when you're running a game and you see it. And you're looking around the table and everyone's looking a little bit blank-eyed because they're not really sure what's going on. But then one player has figured that, and you just see this massive smile together. Hang on a minute, guys! This is what's happening. It's a real kind of sense of achievement.
And actually, I suppose linked to that, I was going to ask you about the sort of rise of actual play shows, and nowadays there are obviously Critical Role is the big daddy of it all, but people seem to be finding entertainment not just playing these games but watching them because of the stories that they can tell.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's if I'm very cynical, it's very cheap TV, because obviously
absolutely,
you haven't got to pay a writer, but but no, a less cynical view is that it's kind of showcasing this style of entertainment, and the fact, because it is, and again, there are YouTubes and podcasts of people playing much more kind of almost war game style role plays, where it's literally a lot of dice rolling, and you can follow that. But the ones that are most successful are the ones that actually have a good storyline and interesting characters, and often that includes a mystery of some kind or something like that. And people, third party people who are kind of watching or consuming this kind of media are getting this they're playing the game vicariously. They have their favorite characters in terms of the players. They get engaged with the plots and try and work out what's going to happen next, or is that character they've just met a baddie or not, and all that kind of thing, just as you do with a TV show. And so it fulfills a similar kind of fulfillment in that sense, in terms of the watcher and viewer. And they're certainly, they're significant. They're you're getting more and more of them. I now, my background before I did all of these things was I did drama. I was an actor. And
all right, okay.
So I now get invited to do live shows where I'm running a game of Call of Cthulhu for normally a bunch of actors or comedians, and we do put on a show with an audience. And so for the last 2 years, I've done a show at the Edinburgh Fringe, where in the National Library of Edinburgh, we do kind of do horror in the library, and a bunch of actors and comedians come and play characters in a game. Normally, I set in the actual library we're playing in, because that's kind of just fun. And I go to like the American shows, and again, we'll do a kind of a Saturday night game with an audience kind of in the round kind of thing. And it's, I'm always amazed people turn up, because, when I first kind of became aware of the phenomena of these live plays, it felt to me like watching paint dry. I don't want to watch other people play the game. I want to play the game. Why would I watch other people play the game? But then it kind of dawned on me that actually, oh no, I can see a merit here. I can see why people are in.
I guess you're watching a story play, aren't you?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's genuine. I mean, I played role-playing games back when I was a kid, but then had a big break, and it was these shows that got me back into, thinking about, wait, this is great fun. I forgot what great fun is, and I got into the games again. So it does have, from the point of view of you guys at the publishers and stuff, it does draw people back into. Oh no, definitely.
Well. No, I mean, it's been a definite. Positive force in that way, and just on in terms of breaking down barriers in terms of accessibility, and because often, as I'm sure you would probably be aware, that for many years, and particularly in the early days of role playing, you tended to be a white guy with a beard and a black t-shirt who played role playing games, and it wasn't really a very diverse crowd. I mean, there always were other people, but now. Particularly with the help of live plays, it's become a much better and diversified kind of grouping of people who are into this stuff. Mm-hmm. Just on the male-female balance is far, far better than what it used to be, much, much more, as opposed to anything else. And so it's really great to see that kind of diversity of audience growing, because at the end of the day, as somebody who writes these games, I enjoy the fact that they're being enjoyed by all sorts of different people who are telling all sorts of different stories with them, wanting to explore, particularly with a game like Cthulhu, which is often historically based, set in the 1920s America or 1930s Europe or wherever, with its own kind of social issues and problems of the time. It's really great to see people who are wanting to explore kind of today's issues through the historical social issues, if you see what I mean, or ignore them and just have a good time and do what they want to do with the game. That's but it's really nice to see that, and it's nice to see those people becoming writers in their own, writing new material for Call of Cthulhu with a particular spin, because they're bringing a different life experience to the game, and that's can only be a good thing.
Yeah, definitely. And sorry, no, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, just to ask kind of finalist question, I suppose, for people out there who are listening, who perhaps have never played RPGs before, or who are who like the sound of them, like the idea of the kind of emergent storytelling. Storytelling. What would you recommend they should start with? What should they do to get into it?
I think number one is start about what do you like? Do you are you a fan of Dune or Tolkien or Hammer horror films or whatever it may be? Yeah, think about what appeals to you, because out there somewhere in the world is a role playing game that is pretty much front and center that thing. Whether that's Dungeons and Dragons, Call of Cthulhu, Pendragon, if you're into chivalry and knights in armor and King Arthur, or if you're into science fiction, it could be any number of sci-fi games like Traveller back in the day and so forth. There's all these games exist, and it's very easy to very quickly find them. Just say a science fiction role-playing game or horror role-playing game and that kind of thing, and you can very quickly find that online. And obviously there's 1,000,001 forums, there's 1,000,001 Facebook groups and Discords and so forth, again, which are all your friends to help you navigate your way through. But and often most of these games will have a starter set, or they are simple enough games that you don't need a starter. They're a small game. But often if it's a big game like Dungeons and Dragons or Call of Cthulhu, there will be a starter set, and that's why I would always recommend you start, because they've been designed specifically for people who are coming into this fairly fresh and new. And certainly the Call of Cthulhu one I designed to be exactly that. Literally, the first thing you do is play a choose your own adventure on your own. So you get home and you play this game, which kind of effectively teaches you the rules and gives you an idea of the style of what the game is about. And then holds your hand in terms of taking your first steps in terms of playing the game. So that's what I would recommend. Obviously, the other thing you can do in parallel or even before is watch some live plays or listen to some live plays. Try and say, well, I've listened to this one where they were playing Dungeons and Dragons, but that didn't really appeal. So I've tried this other one and found my fix, or vice versa. I've listened to this Call of Cthulhu one, but I'm not really into horror. But then I listened to this Critical Role group. Oh, it's great! I love the elves or whatever it is, and you find your family in that sense. So so that's and back in the day, it used to be, well, find your local game store and go in and have a look on the shelf and have a chat to the person behind the counter, and they'd give you some advice. But you don't need to do that these days. You can just go online and find it much quicker.
Absolutely. And this year is Call of Cthulhu's 50th anniversary. And you've got, there have been some books out this year. There's been the Arkham setting book, which is just a setting book. And I think there's other setting books coming out soon. I just wondered what's on the slate for coming out in the next year or so.
Just so I don't get told off, technically, the Call of Cthulhu is published by Chaosium, isn't it?
Right, okay.
So it's Chaosium's 50th anniversary.
Okay, sorry.
Call of Cthulhu's getting on for 40 plus years now, so not quite 50 yet. But yeah, to get to your point, so we put out the Arkham book, as you just mentioned, which is a setting guide, and it's kind of like there's no preordained adventures within that, but there are lots of seeds for people to basically, it's like a massive sandbox.
Yeah.
So you can throw your players in and they can go wherever they like, and there's always something to trouble them wherever they go. So I'm currently actually finishing the follow-up book to that, which is Innsmouth, which is currently in layout or will be out in 2026. And if you know anything about any of their kind of Cthulhu mythos lore, then Innsmouth, you'll know, is all about this little coastal town where all the people are weird and look at you strange, and there's all these big secrets and all this kind of thing. So that's pretty cool. We've also very recently released the Gaslight, kind of late Victorian era setting for Call of Cthulhu, where you're running around either London or England, perhaps getting a boat over to New York and then getting on a coach and becoming a cowboy in the Wild West. It kind of crosses the whole kind of gamut. But so we've got some material coming out, kind of follow-up material for Gaslight, notably a very a big campaign, kind of in the style of Massacre of Nyarlathotep, set across England in the late kind of 1890s, and kind of there's what's really cool. What I really like about it is each of the chapters has been written by a different author, but they've all used a different kind of semi-Victorian era horror writer as kind of their thematic inspiration. So there's a story that is clearly kind of inspired by Arthur Machen. There's a Dickens one, and so forth. M.R. James, and they've all got a little nod to a different author, which cool. If you're into that kind of stuff, is a nice kind of Easter egg, I guess. So we're currently working on that at the moment. Again, that'll be out later next year, but what we've got coming out in the very near future is it's called Campfire Tales. And so it's set in the 1920s America, but you can transpose it anywhere you want, where you actually, it's got rules for creating kind of 11-year-old kids who are scouts. And so you kind of join the scout group, and, while you're off in the woods earning your campfire merit badge, you encounter some monster and you've got to deal with it, and so it's kind of like proto investigators, before you're adults.
I like
it kind of creates an instant backstory for your later character, because when I was in the scouts, me and my mates, we all encountered these horrors, and we all realized how bad it was, and we've been fighting them ever since. And now we're all 30s and we're professors and librarians. You've got this kind of instant backstory. So it's a book all about that. So it kind of, you help kind of some rules to kind of create younger investigators effectively, and cool things like when you earn a a merit badge, it gives you a bonus in game for something. So clearly, if you got your rock climbing badge, you're going to get a bonus if you're ever climbing up a wall.
That's quite a neat little system.
Yeah,
like
absolutely. And then it comes with a kind of a 4 scenarios that kind of occur over the ages you're growing up. So it starts around you're 11 years old, and then the second scenario you're about 13, 14, and then the next one you're sort of 16ish, and then the last one you're kind of 17, 18 on the verge of adulthood in that sense. And so it kind of, you can play them all as this thematic kind of campaign, or you could just play them as one shots depending on what you want to do. But and they're really cool. They're very different stories, and they involve kids, meddling kids, and all that kind of thing. And so so looking forward to getting that one out. Again, that will be in the new year, fairly early in the new year, all being well. But yeah.
But, I mean, that
never stops. It never stops.
No, it doesn't. I mean, they all sound great. I wish you would stop, because I keep spending money on these books, but they're great. No, they sound brilliant. Well, those were the main questions we had. But very quickly at the end, we always like to ask our guests the same questions. The first of which is, what was the last book that you read?
Sure. Let me think. So the one I last read was Leviathan. Which is all about the history of the whale, which is it's a non-fiction, and it uses Moby Dick as a kind of as a foundational piece across, because it will kind of describe the story of Moby Dick and then cut away to some historical or factual material about whales or whaling, and whether historical or modern. And that was really good. I really enjoyed that, because I'm a kind of fan of Moby Dick, I guess. So anything related to that tends to appeal to me. That was the last non-fiction. I'm trying to think of the last fiction. The last fiction I read was a reread. To be honest, I reread A Night in Lonesome October, the one where you read a chapter a day, beginning October, taking up to Halloween.
Oh, that's cool.
It's a slightly tongue-in-cheek, kind of horror novel with all these famous characters in who are not, you use their non-famous names, the Count and the Doctor and the scientist and all that kind of thing. But I've read it before, and it's I really enjoyed that as ever, because it's a good fun.
Excellent.
Nice. What about the last film that you watched?
Last film would be Frankenstein, the Guillermo del Toro.
I've not seen it.
I've not watched it yet.
At the cinema, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I thought he did a great job with that, and I thought visually it was very appealing, very well done visually, and I thought it was a reasonable adaptation to the story in that sense. So I enjoyed that. Have you both seen it?
No, I've not seen it yet. I do want to watch it, but I've not seen it.
Because they filmed a bunch of it in Edinburgh as well.
Yeah, they did. Yeah.
Is it set in Edinburgh, part of the story, or is it just used as a filming location?
I think they just used it for the sort
of age
of the buildings.
Yeah.
So, they're well worth seeing, definitely, especially if you get on Netflix. It's free now. So
that's right.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
what about TV? What have you been watching on TV?
I just started watching Pluribus.
Oh yeah. I've not watched it.
And I'm only like an episode or two in, so I've no idea what's going on, other than I'm kind of enjoying it so far. I kind of like. I've been watching the new series of Mayor of Kingstown.
Oh yeah, I've not watched that.
Which is one of the Taylor Sheridan programs. Again, it's a kind of a gritty, reasonably gritty, kind of crimey kind of story thing, which I quite enjoy that. But mainly what I've been, this will link back to something I said earlier. What I've been rewatching on the old DVDs is Babylon 5.
Okay.
So I'm kind of making my way through those. Did you ever watch Babylon 5?
I only watched like episodes here and there. I didn't.
Okay.
It's a show that I keep meaning to actually go back and watch.
I know, Tara, you love it.
I feel right up my street. I went down the Deep Space Nine route at that time. I was in that camp, so So, but obviously, I did that crap when I was watching.
I did that a couple of years ago. No, it's Babylon 5 is well, it's like Star Trek. There are some really great episodes.
I'm sure.
Less great episodes, but overarchingly, it's the story arc, which is what's interesting. And I guess what may have inspired my rewatch is I read Michael J. Straczynski's kind of autobiography, the Becoming Superman.
Oh yeah, I've
heard of it, I don't know if you've read, but I would recommend reading it because it's a great story about how he, his professional life intertwined with a family mystery, and so it's really nicely done. I listened to it on Audible with it was read out by I can't think of the actor's name now, but he's the actor that plays Londo Malari in Babylon 5. Got a great voice.
Okay.
It was very entertaining. So I think I read that and then was inspired to kind of rewatch the program. I think.
Cool. Nice. He's an excellent writer. His run in Spider-Man was like legendary. It was 5-6 years whatever he did for 10 years and crazy stuff. Well, the very, very last thing we always do is a super quick fire either or, and there's no real answer, no real right answer to any of these, to be honest. But let's begin with keeper or player.
Keeper. I'd like to know what's going on.
A one shot or a campaign?
That's tough. I guess I'm going to say one shot. Because the beauty of one shots is all bets are off.
Yeah,
you can literally play them, drive them like a stolen car, as they say, and your character has a short lifespan, so make it burn brightly, kind of thing.
Nice.
Absolutely.
TV or cinema?
Well, you see, back in the early days, it'd be cinema, wouldn't it? But TV now is kind of really seems to have come on its own, and probably I'll have to say TV these days.
Yeah.
Night owl or early bird?
Night owl. on all writers' night owl. I don't know.
Exactly.
Let's go for the last one. Let's go for real book or ebook.
Real book. I mean,
I'm
not anti ebooks, but if I'm.
All right. Okay. What if I was to ask you ebook or audiobook?
I'd go audiobook.
Poor ebooks.
Tarek always tries to get people to say ebook, and
nobody ever picks ebooks. Nobody ever picks ebooks. So I feel I always have to try and give them a push.
I have to say Audible, but because myself and I mentioned Paul Fricken, my kind of writing partner, we do a horror fiction podcast, so where we actually read out each other's stories. So
cool.
It's called Mason and Fricker's Eldritch Stories. And you can just put in eldritchstories.com and you'll find us. But it's micro short stories. So we, 5-10 minutes at most, a short horror story, and we just read each other's. And then in the off weeks, we chat like we've been doing today, but normally more inanely about nothing in particular. But we really do. We do it by season. We've just finished our second season, and then we'll put out a new season. Second half of next year, but nice. Check it out. Eldritch Stories,
excellent. Okay, well, thanks very much, Mike. That was great.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much to Mike for coming on to chat to us. Really great episode, really nice guy. And when it comes to Call of Cthulhu, it's a game that I've played for the first time just a few weeks ago when we recorded our first actual play, and it was the first time I've ever played it. I've played Delta Green and Alien in a little bit, but I never played the Call of Cthulhu game, and it is a really fun experience. As Marco said at the start, it's normal people kind of getting pulled into horror, Lovecraftian investigations, and the monsters and the insanity that ensues from all of that stuff. And it's really fun. It's like playing a kind of old X-Filesy kind of vibes at times and stuff. And it's very, for someone who's not well versed in it, it's a very easy game for newcomers to get involved in.
The rule
it's not difficult.
There are some nuances to the rules, but they're pretty simple. You've got a skill and roll under it to succeed, basically. And you can tell such great stories with it, which again, as I say, is the point of narrative damage. We want to, you and I are authors, I love the storytelling, the narrative side of these games. That's why I'm putting these out on page one as well. I know some people might not be immediately interested in role-playing games, but it's just another vehicle for telling stories, really. And getting authors around the table to tell stories together, I thought would be fun, which is why we started Narrative Damage. And next week, we are going to have our first actual play, the first episode of our actual play on Narrative Damage. And here's a little trailer for that.
Oh, that does sound fantastic. And as someone who was there playing it, I can confirm it is actually fantastic. So it is as good as it sounds.
Not that you're biased or anything. So please do tune in for that. I hope you're excited. We've got Tarek playing. I'm running the game, but we've got a couple of other authors as well. And the idea with Narrative Damage is that we will be playing different sorts of games across, in different weeks, and we will be getting different authors to come and sit round the table with us and play games. But before we go, I did mention that Mike, and I want to say thank you to Mike again for the time to come on to the podcast, but he also gave us these. If you're watching it on video, you'll see this. It's a Call of Cthulhu starter set. He gave us a couple of these, and we're going to give these away as part of our launch of Narrative Damage and to celebrate our first actual play. If you want to find out how to win those, you need to tune in to the first episode next week, and it will all be explained. And also follow us on socials. We're at Narrative Damage RPG on Instagram and Blue Sky. You can watch us on YouTube, subscribe to us, subscribe to the podcast on your favourite podcast app. It really helps when we're trying to get a new podcast going if you can share it, like it, give it ratings, give it reviews, give it thumbs up, leave comments under the YouTube videos and all of that sort of thing, because it's difficult to get noticed and we really want to make a success of this new podcast. If you are a page one viewer, regular viewer or listener, we will be returning to our regular series of interviews with all sorts of different types of authors as well shortly. We've got some great episodes already recorded, and those will be coming up in the next few weeks. So if you've enjoyed this episode, as I say, please do give us a rating and review, because it does genuinely make a difference.
That's right. And in addition to the socials that Marco just mentioned, you want to get in touch to the page one address, you can always do so by finding us on the usual social medias. Just search for @UKPage1. You can send us an email to podcast@page1.co.uk. Or you can leave a comment under the YouTube video.
Tarek's just made up an email address there.
What is it? Hello.
podcast@rightgear.co.uk.
Oh my God! Why? After years of getting it right, I've slipped. I've totally slipped. Right. Forget that. Edit. Bleep out that podcast. The podcast email address I just said. The actual email address. This is why no one's been getting in touch. The actual email address to get in touch is podcast@rightgear.co.uk.
And you can contact us there for page one stuff or Narrative Damage stuff. There is also a Narrative Damage email address. Podcast@narrativedamage. At narrativedamage.com. That's what it is. Yeah, I can't remember. These things are difficult to remember. Too many ways of contacting us.
Yeah. You should just have one.
Choose one of them.
Choose one of them.
Get in touch. We do want to know what you think of these new Narrative Damage episodes.
Yeah.
It is going to be with Narrative Damage. Just talking about that just now. It's going to be its own channel. It's going to have interviews with all sorts of creators from the tabletop role-playing game scene, including, writers, players, creators, possibly illustrators even, and stuff like that. We just want to explore the whole world of role-playing, as well as I say, actual plays with some of your favourite authors that we're going to do sort of short scenarios of in different types of games. So it's going to be a lot of fun, I'm hoping. And I hope you enjoy it as well. But in the meantime, I hope you have a great week, and we will speak to you next episode.
See you later.
Well, we hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, be sure to hit that thumbs up button and hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode like these ones down here.
And if you want to get in touch, you can do so by finding us on our social media platforms up here, or drop us a comment way down below there.
But otherwise, thanks for listening, and join us for the next episode.
See you later.